Welcome back. Welcome back to NAAAP News. Welcome back and welcome back to the channel. Welcome back. Welcome back to Star Dharma's channel and NAAAP News. Yes, with Latanya. And I'm back for another news event. This one is about the Justice Clarence Thomas. Justice Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. Justice Clarence Thomas got a lot of talk going on. Possible crimes committed, allegedly. Possible crimes committed by Justice Clarence Thomas, taking gifts, possibly bribes and gifts from other people, rich billionaires, and possibly gifts and money or blackmails to vote the way they want them to vote. Taking money from right wingers, white supremacists, and right wingers, taking money from them to vote the way that they want him to vote. Allegedly, it's all written and it's all documented on the PBS special, the Frontline special. Clarence and Jenny Thomas, Politics, Power, and the Supreme Court by Frontline. Shout out to Frontline. Thank you for the video. And thank you for watching. Like I said, NAAAP News with Latanya. We're here to give the latest on African American news in America. And the latest news concerning Africans and African Americans around the world. To give true justice and true knowledge about what's really going on. I'm going to go ahead and get started with the video. I'm going to give my commentary as always. Commentary by Latanya. Subscribe. Make sure you subscribe. Subscribe to Star Dharma's channel so you don't miss out on any more great news from Latanya and NAAAP News. Subscribe.
Idea that I won't be told what to think just because of the color of my skin. Animated Clarence Thomas.
Overturning Roe versus Wade.
Now, Clarence and Jenny Thomas. Politics, power, and the Supreme Court.
Some people might call it payback. Others might call it the fulfillment of his dreams.
Yes, payback. Payback. The big payback, like James Brown said.
In the days before the 2020 election,
A massive impact on the American judiciary.
a decisive moment.
Clarence Thomas, Amy Coney Barrett. Folks, do you know how big this is? This is huge.
Presiding over the ceremony, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas.
I solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution.
Amy Coney Barrett had chosen Thomas to swear her in.
So help me God.
So help me God.
A sign of transformation inside the High Court.
It's a moment of victory for Clarence Thomas. He's now become the center of the court. And I think he would say he won.
Justice Thomas has developed into one of the leading lights on the court, if not the leading lights. This is why it's often referred to as the Thomas Court now. He really is sort of the ideological and intellectual center of gravity on the court.
In the front row, Thomas's wife, Jenny.
It was a momentous moment. Jenny Thomas is as good as any, maybe the best embodiment of the American right today. She's a true believer. She has always been on the far right. Her politics are all about this politics of fear and anger. That's Jenny Thomas.
Two powerful conservatives on the court and in politics, pursuing a shared vision.
This duo of Clarence Thomas and Jenny Thomas, they are the it couple of the far right.
Two lives shaped by
Make sure
history
you subscribe to Star Diamond's channel. Subscribe.
And segregation forever.
politics,
The American women do not want ERA. They do not want abortion.
and race. Desperate, Clarence's mother, Leola Williams, gave up the boys, sending them to live at their grandfather's.
I'm going to jump around. I'm going to give my commentary. I can't record it like it is for copyright. Fair Use Act. Lala Latanya's commentary.
My earliest memories are those of Pinpoint, Georgia, a life far removed in space and time.
Clarence Thomas's journey to the center of American power began as far away as one can get from it.
He came up poor, very poor, from a marginal community. They talk about marginalized and underrepresented communities. Well, the Geechee dialect speaking, Sea Island dwelling, poor black people of the 1950s, which is when he was coming along, were as marginal, I can imagine, as you could get within the context of American society.
In 1955, my brother and I went to live with my mother in Savannah. We lived in one room in a tenement. We shared a kitchen with other tenants, and we had a common bathroom in the backyard, which was unworkable and unusable. It was hard, but it was all we had and all there was.
His father left early and moved away. His mother was a single mother. His mother married many times. He didn't have a relationship with any of, not his biological dad or any that came afterwards.
His mom has talked to me about how that was a very bleak period of her life when she had to do, but she said, but I had to do what I had to do.
Desperate, Clarence's mother, Leola Williams, gave up the boys, sending them to live at their grandfather's house.
Clarence had been rescued from a life of poverty and ended up in a house that had a toilet, running water, and his ability to go to school every day.
But life with his grandfather, Myers Anderson, had its own challenges.
That's why Clarence Thomas grew up to sell out and have the strange ideas that he had against black people, because you see right there, because his mother gave him up as a child. His mother gave him and his brother up as a child. You see his beautiful mother, she was a beautiful black woman. She was struggling in the South, back in the Jim Crow days, before the Civil Rights Movement, before the blacks had any legal rights. Her mother was struggling in the South as a single woman, a single parent with two boys, and she was doing well. She should have kept them, even living in poverty. Some people think that a child is happier with money, but no, a child is happier with their mama. She should have kept them, but she didn't. She gave the children up because she felt like she couldn't afford to take care of them in the slums or whatever ghetto she was living in, and she gave the boys up to live with her father. That's her father right there, Clarence Thomas' father. As if you need to rewind it, you can get his mother's name. But that's one of the reasons why I feel Clarence Thomas sold out. Why Clarence Thomas sold out against black people and voted against affirmative action and other things that black people needed. That's why he voted against certain black people in the Supreme Court, I feel. And that's why he married a white woman, because he was angry. He was angry at his mother. He was angry at his black mother for giving him up as a child to his grandfather. And they say his grandfather was very mean and abusive mentally. I'm going to continue the video. Make sure you subscribe. Subscribe.
He was tough. He was hard. I don't think empathy might have been his strongest point.
I interviewed Clarence Thomas's mother. She described that the grandfather would lock Clarence Thomas and his little brother in the hall closet and not let them out for punishment. And he also whipped them with a belt quite routinely. His grandfather beat the two boys quite often, whenever it was that they didn't do something fast enough or well enough. He was physically, mentally, verbally abusive to both of the boys. Probably the unhappiest that he's ever been in his life was the time that he spent in his grandfather's house.
Things weren't much easier for Clarence out in segregated Savannah.
Savannah would have been divided on racial lines. And when I say that, don't just think I'm talking white, black. We had racial divides among the black community.
They had the brown bag rule. Your complexion. It is either equal to the brown bag or lighter. Anything darker, it was ridiculed or derogated in some way.
Thomas wrote about it in his autobiography.
Most of the insults aimed at me had to do with the darkness of my skin, the flatness of my nose, the kinkiness of my hair, and the way I talked. Such racial slurs stung all the more for having come from my own people.
The issues of class and race have always been at the heart of how Thomas has seen himself. That's the prism through which he sees his own life. And at every turn, there is a racial dimension to his life that he talks about.
Clarence was, frankly, never comfortable around the black people in Georgia. Clarence had been ridiculed by the children in that area around Pinpoint, and he was nicknamed ABC for America's Blackest Child. So from an early age, Clarence really felt estranged, I think, from his entire community.
The resentment and anger that can provoke within the darker skinned and blacker individuals also not so pretty. It's a psychologically debilitating aspect of African American experience, this kind of class, color, prejudice that operates amongst Black Americans.
I guess the thing I remember most about Clarence is him as an altar boy. Whenever father needed to find altar boys, all my classmates and all would hide. Clarence would volunteer.
He had a grandfather who was a devout Catholic and wanted him to have the Catholic experience.
His grandfather paid $20 a year for Clarence to attend St. Benedict's School.
Our teachers the nuns were called the nuns in Savannah. In other words, they were assigned to educate Black kids.
Whatever our circumstances, the nuns treated us all with respect and insisted that we do our best, though some of them insisted harder than others.
One of the nuns paid special attention to Clarence.
Sister Mary Virgilius, my 8th grade teacher, took a no-nonsense, high expectations approach to teaching, which may be why she got the most out of me.
I think his nurturing came from them because it wasn't coming from his immediate family. I don't think he had the nurturing of parents and whatever we would normally get, and the nuns and the priests provided that for him.
The Catholic Church can be a refuge from everything else that's going on in your life. I wanted to be a nun before I hit puberty. And so it was not surprising to me that he would want to go into the seminary.
Clarence excelled at the school, and before long, the nuns began to tout him as a role model.
The nuns, that's all they talked about. Clarence Thomas is going to be our first black priest in Savannah, and you should really admire him for that, young boys and young girls.
He is hard-driving and ambitious and very hardworking. He's trying to prove himself. You can sort of see in him from this early period that it's kind of like, I'll show them. And I don't care if you reject me. I'm going to make it anyway, and I'll show you.
If Clarence Thomas struggled in the segregated South, in the middle of America, his future wife, Jenny Lamb, was living a seemingly picture-perfect life.
The thing about the Midwest is that the largest feature of the landscape is the sky. There's like over 180 degrees of sky. I suppose a long vista gives you a sense that there's something beyond. There's something more out there.
Leave it to Beaver.
Beaver, what's the matter with your eye?
Clarence Thomas.
Which eye, Mom?
Clarence Thomas, he was
I remember watching Leave It to Beaver and
boy.
thinking as a child, well, that's.
And so,
beautiful young boy. Let me see if I get right back to it. He was beautiful. He was beautiful. There was no reason for them to treat him like they did him. He was very beautiful. Him and his little brother, they were beautiful kids. Look at him. He was beautiful. There was no reason why they should have called him names like that. I know how it is because I was ridiculed in the 5th grade. I was 10 years old. I was ridiculed for being dark-skinned. Kids call kids names no matter what you is. They'll find something to call your name about. Either they'll call your name about your skin tone, or either how you look, or what you got on, what clothes you wear. They'll make fun of your parents, or they'll make fun of if you light skin or dark skin, whatever. Kids do that because they just ignorant. They don't know. They just make fun. But it is hurtful as a child. I remember as a child, the Star Wars was out in the early 80s, that Star Wars movie, and they was calling me Darth Vader. And then, just calling names for a whole year. I think that whole 5th grade, it was just a couple boys was calling me names. Darth Vader. But now I'm proud to be dark. And now I don't care if someone called me black or dark. Or I wish I was darker. Now I realize it's blessed to be dark skinned. And it's a pride of being African. That's all right. That's the way the Lord made us. We're melanin to absorb the sunlight for energy and to protect us from the sun rays. You see, him and his little brother was beautiful. I'm gonna continue on, and then he ended up. Now they're gonna talk about this white woman he met. She was brainwashed from all them white folks she lived around.
The kind of American dream locale in the 1960s and early 70s.
Kurt Anderson grew up across the street from Ginny.
Where we lived was this prosperous, all-white neighborhood. except for the housekeepers and cleaners, it was easy to go for days, weeks, months, forever without seeing black people, frankly, is what it was.
She came from within almost a walled bastion, you know?
Scott Bange was her high school boyfriend.
There was no exposure in her life to somebody who was a high school kid and drank, or smoked weed, or did all those things that I thought were normal and high school kids did. She was a pretty good little girl.
She was just kind of a not exceptional, middle of the pack girl in these giant classes of 750 people.
She was involved in things like pep club. And then she became something they called warrior woman. She would lead the marching band and all these, people carrying pennants and whatnot.
But at home, there was something underneath the everyday suburban veneer.
She's the youngest child of a very prosperous real estate developer. Her mom was a homemaker and political activist. They were leading what looked outwardly like an idyllic suburban lifestyle.
I've heard Ginny Thomas say that she was sort of the mistake child, that she was born a lot later. So her parents were very politically engaged. They thought they were done having children, and then comes along Ginny. They would take her to these Republican rallies, and so she grew up with Republican activism, and obviously it took.
It was a Republican activism beyond the norm, even in conservative Omaha.
I first became familiar with the Lambs from my parents talking about them as what they called black hats. That was their phrase for extreme, far-right, John Birchie Republicans.
The Lamps were immersed in a growing culture of right-wing fear-mongering, like this film from supporters of presidential candidate Barry Goldwater.
Our streets are not safe. Immorality begins to flourish. Violence pits American against American. We don't want this.
It's there in this film. Shots of the city, of newsstands with pornography on it, and fast cars, and kids doing the twist and topless dancing, and the whole realm of cultural, boogeymen.
Demoralization, chaos. This is the change, the other America that the people slowly wake up to. In the streets, the mob. Mobocracy.
As Ginny was growing up, the conflicts of the 1960s were being broadcast on television.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
There you are, a preteen, and you're a sponge, right?
In a march this morning to the county courthouse at Selma, Alabama.
Television had really expanded.
The whole black nation has to be put together as a black army.
Everything came right into your living room, so to speak, every night.
In response, the Lamps were drawn to the John Birch Society.
The civil rights movement, as we know it today, is simply part of a worldwide movement organized and directed by communists to enslave all mankind.
The John Birch Society became a code word for very far out there right-wing beliefs and activities.
Their objective is not communist conquest, it's anarchy. Breakdown of law and order. Helplessness.
For young Ginny, it left an impression.
Circling communist might.
You can see so many echoes in the John Birch Society of what became QAnon and other sort of far-right radical conspiracy theories. And, this was a very sort of black and white point of view that made politics into war. That was the kind of the mindset that Ginny Lamp grew up in.
In Gullah, the name of this poem is Damn Full Gals, okay? God stick by chillin'. You got much a good thing, fling bout.
As a child, Clarence had grown up speaking the language of the enslaved people of Georgia.
It's called Gullah Geechee.
When we greeted people, we say, how una tatu?
We used to call it Pidgin English, but I think it was a French flavor to it.
As one of only 2 black students attending a high school seminary, the vestiges of that dialect made him a target of ridicule.
Not only does it remind everybody around him that he's different, it also reminds them that he's of a lower caste. It has to be monumental for him.
Father Coleman told me matter-of-factly that I didn't speak standard English and that I would have to learn how to talk properly if I didn't want to be thought inferior.
That's what other people
His
of
blunt
color
words hit me like a slap in the
about
face.
people that's darker than them. Like in India,
That moment stuck with him for the rest of his life.
India and East India, they called the
Clarence, when he got really relaxed, would
because they're
revert
darker tone.
to some of those
She's look like
ways
she's
of
Asian, so they
phrasing
people
and
of
that
other
accent.
descent, other people of color that's not black.
But he was always
they got their own
extremely
racism
conscious
too about
of
color,
how he
and they
pronounced
call
words
people that's dark skinned
because
a
he had
lower
been
caste.
forced to do that.
Lower caste. I don't
When
like
the justice
that,
was on the High Court,
because
he was
she's
famous
Asian,
for not
she's
speaking
not really
during
black.
oral argument.
She's of color,
And one of the
she's not
explanations he would
African-American.
offer for that
She don't
was because he was
understand how
embarrassed
that's
about how he
racist,
talked,
what
even
she
though that was so far in the past that no one who knows the present day Clarence Thomas would think that that would be a concern of his, but it indeed was.
His days living in the white seminary shaped him in other ways, too.
He was in a dormitory living on that campus. So it had to be tough. You know, when somebody says something derogatory to you in that environment, you got to deal with it because you're there 24/7.
Yeah, they said
Good night before he'd go to sleep now and then, there'd be a laughter in the room and someone would say, Clarence, smile so we can see you, that kind of thing.
Call him a nigger. He heard when the white
When
boys
they
call him a
put the
nigger.
lights out at night, his
Excuse
peers
the
would
language.
shout.
He heard when the white boys call him the N-word.
Seminary. The vestiges of that dialect made him a target of ridicule.
Not only does it remind everybody around him that he's different, it also reminds them that he's of a lower caste. It has to be monumental for him.
Father Coleman told me matter-of-factly that I didn't speak standard English and that I would have to learn how to talk properly if I didn't want to be thought inferior. His blunt words hit me like a slap in the face.
That moment stuck with him for the rest of his life.
Clarence, when he got really relaxed, would revert to some of those ways of phrasing and that accent. But he was always extremely conscious of how he pronounced words because he had been forced to do that.
Yeah, see, people don't understand.
When the justice was on the High Court, he was famous for not speaking during oral argument. And one of the explanations he would offer for that was because he was embarrassed about how he talked, even though that was so far in the past that no one who knows the present day Clarence Thomas would think that that would be a concern of his, but it indeed was.
Just like Clarence Thomas got identity crisis.
His days living in the white seminary shaped him in other
Certain
ways,
people,
too.
it can cause people to have depression.
He was in a dormitory living on that campus.
Low self-esteem.
So it had to be tough. You know, when somebody says something derogatory to you in that environment, you got to deal with it because you're there 24/7.
Good night before he'd go to sleep now and then, there'd be a laughter in the room and someone would say, Clarence, smile so we can see you, that kind of thing.
When they put the lights out at night, his peers would shout for hours at night. keep him up.
After he entered the
To make money these days with the price of gas being so high? Not for me. I use Upside, the free app that gives you cash back for every gallon of gas you buy. Wait a minute. Are you saying you actually get real money back when you get gas with the Upside app?
Yep, I do. He was famous for not speaking during oral argument. And one of the explanations he would offer for that was because he was embarrassed about how he talked, even though that was so far in the past that no one who knows the present day Clarence Thomas would think that that would be a concern of his, but it indeed was.
His days living in the White Seminary shaped him in other ways, too.
He was in a dormitory living on that campus. So it had to be tough. You know, when somebody says something derogatory to you in that environment, you got to deal with it because you're there 24/7.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
Good
Thank
night
you.
before he'd go to sleep now and then, there'd be a laughter in the room and someone would say, Clarence, smile so we can see you, that kind of thing.
When they put the lights out at night, his peers would shout for hours at night, keep him up.
After he entered the major seminary, one event would become a turning point.
I have some very sad news for all of you and people who love peace all over the world. And that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight.
After Martin Luther King is assassinated, that day he hears his fellow seminarians say, "Good, I hope the SOB dies." You know, it's crushing to him. It's absolutely crushing.
Our hero is murdered and you're dancing on his grave, so to speak. These are not my people, the people who would dance on his grave. What am I doing with them? Where am I? Who am I? This kind of thing. You begin to ask yourself, what am I buying into here?
I tore off the beliefs I had learned from the nuns. I knew what was wrong, who to blame for it, and what to do about it. I was an angry black man.
That seminary was too much for him. He had to leave. It was heart-wrenching. Not only did he leave the religion that sustained him, but he was also living there. And so he had to go back to this household where he was treated like a dog.
Had to be tremendously painstaking. You're going to disappoint so many people. Your grandfather, the black community, the black Catholic community in Savannah. All these people are looking for you to be the first black priest.
The grandfather's saying, what? You're leaving the seminary? You're out of my house. I'm cutting you off. You're not going to be supported. And again, Thomas is abandoned, right? He's left alone. He's left to fend for himself.
I'm finished helping you, he said. You'll have to figure it out yourself. You'll probably end up like your no-good daddy or those other no-good pinpoint Negroes.
Instead of the grandfather being sympathetic and compassionate and loving and hugging him and saying, I love you no matter what, or whatever a normal person would do, he excoriated him and told him that he was a failure and expressed his dire disappointment.
Over the years, Thomas would downplay this image of his grandfather and express admiration for the man who gave him a home as a child.
I mean, the grandfather is in the title of his autobiography, My Grandfather's Son. That's how he thought of himself. But the picture that he paints in that book is completely the opposite of how Clarence described his grandfather to me.
Now, this is allegedly from this is how his ex-girlfriend, that's his ex-girlfriend. This is allegedly how she thought he felt.
My thanks to all of you, and now on to Chicago and let's win there.
Subscribe and like. Subscribe so you don't miss out on any more NAAA
One day I
news
turned on the
Latanya
radio while making my
on the
sandwich.
Star Diamonds channel. Subscribe to Star Diamonds channel. Thank you. If you like,
I heard
hit the
that
like
Bobby
button.
Kennedy had been
Subscribe.
shot.
Oh my God. Senator Kennedy has been shot.
I fell to
They
my
said
knees and
President
burst
Kennedy
into
was
tears.
shot.
That's it, Raper. Get it. Get the gun, Raper.
I believe
Okay, now hold on to the guy.
they got Clarence
I
Thomas'
felt the
voice.
blind, self-destructive rage that haunted so
He's
many of the
reading from
people I
his
knew.
The crowd is running, and the police are chasing them into Jackson,
when he
into
was
Grant
growing
Park.
up.
Surely the time for politeness and nonviolent protest was over. Look what it had done for Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy.
We aren't going to put up with their nonsense, with their irrationality, with their murder any longer.
The more injustice I saw, the angrier I became.
We're going to shoot the cops who are shooting our black brothers in the back in this country. That's where we're going.
And the angrier I became, the more injustice I saw.
I wanted to say also, when he left the seminary, the Catholic Church, or the priest, I believe he was right. He was right in that instance, because he said, "What is he doing here amongst all these white people?" And they calling him the N-word. So he was right in that sense. He could have stayed strong and stayed there longer, but it was his time to leave, and he left and he went to college and he learned more history about himself. This when he went to college. He went to college, and but he ended up going to a white college with only 28 black people there. That's why it's not good for black people to go to a mostly white college. It's good to go to a historically black college.
And the more I read about the Black Power movement, the more I wanted to be a part of it.
Lasima Tusinda Bila Shaka, which means we shall conquer without a doubt. Black Power.
Now Clarence Thomas, budding campus radical, would pursue his education elsewhere. He received a scholarship to a private college in Massachusetts.
Hear the songs of Holy Cross.
At the point when Clarence Thomas got into Holy Cross, the school was actually actively looking for black students. The president of Holy Cross, Johnny Brooks, who set up this program, described it as affirmative action. That's what opened the doors for him.
Holy Cross, Catholic, all male, more than 2,000 white students, 27 black students, many of them as frustrated as Clarence was.
Now, I was pissed off. I had evolved from being hopeful to being pissed off. A lot of young people in America was pissed off, and they weren't seeking a reconciliation, okay? They're seeking a coup. Change the whole thing.
See, that's his friend in
We all
college.
involved in it. I was involved in the protest. He was. Literally everybody who went up there. And we, those of us from the South, we were right there with them saying, yeah, man, we want to push.
He definitely was inspired by the Black Panthers. He dressed like them. He talked like them. He had a beret, he had army fatigues, and he had the army boots.
He wore an afro. He was out there with everyone else. I think it was positive because he had a group. He wasn't alone now. And he became part of his group.
I don't know if he had a well-formed political philosophy before he got to Holy Cross. Maybe he was simply going along. But the years, 1968, 1969, gosh, I was there. And the forces of conformity to a sense of outraged fury, resistance, the throwing off of oppression by any means necessary. It was very seductive, it was very compelling to many, many people, among whom was Clarence Thomas.
And he had a hero, Malcolm X.
We want freedom by any means necessary.
We want justice by any means necessary. We want equality by any means necessary.
He had a poster of Malcolm X in his dorm room.
Justice Thomas boasted at one point he had read all of his speeches. And he said at one time he could quote you some of them by heart. I mean, so he really did pay attention to Malcolm X.
We are oppressed. We are exploited. We are downtrodden. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights.
Clarence Thomas's activism culminated in his junior year as protests broke out 40 miles away in Harvard Square.
An estimated 2,000 radical students from the greater Boston area decided to march to Cambridge and continue demonstrating.
We drank our way to Harvard Square, where our disorderly parade deteriorated into a full-scale riot.
The demonstration then turned into the most extreme civil disorder in Cambridge history. 4,000 students against 2,000 police.
The police fired rounds of tear gas into the crowd, but that didn't deter us, and we kept on rioting well into the night. I got back to campus at 4 in the morning, horrified by what I'd just done.
All over the United States yesterday, there were anti-war protests, most of them peaceful. One was not at Harvard University last night.
Nearly 200 people were injured. 40 students were arrested.
I had let myself be swept up by an angry mob for no good reason, other than that I too was angry.
And certainly somebody talks about a lot. Here I am in Harvard Square and like this mini riot. Like, what am I doing here, right? What am I doing?
He was conflicted about what he'd done, who he was, what he stood for.
I don't think anything about Clarence Thomas is simple. I mean, he's a bundle of contradictions, and it seems like there's just always so much inner tension within him. Yes, he was radical like his peers, but not as radical. And he broke with them in various ways. And he's always breaking with whatever the dominant political trope is. He says, he's always talking about how he's not going to do what's fashionable. He wants to be different.
Because
he
of
set about
what they
remaking
was doing
himself.
To the black community
Gone
at the
was
time,
the Black Panther uniform.
and all the racism.
Proving his grandfather wrong, he excelled at school,
been glad they was rioting.
graduating near the top of his class.
He felt bad.
And the next day, he married his college girlfriend, Kathy Ambush.
But he should have been glad. That
I asked him, why did you marry her? And he said, because she was the first woman who was nice to me. He always had a problem with women. He regarded himself as not attractive.
He stood for.
I don't think anything about Clarence Thomas is simple. I mean, he's a bundle of contradictions, and it seems like there's just always so much inner tension within him.
So his character.
Yes, he was radical like his peers, but not as radical. And he broke with them in various ways. And he's always breaking with whatever the dominant political trope is. He says, he's always talking about how he's not going to do what's fashionable. He wants to be different.
He set about remaking himself. Gone was the Black Panther uniform. Proving his grandfather wrong, he excelled at school, graduating near the top of his class. And the next day, he married his college girlfriend, Kathy Ambush.
Like and subscribe.
I asked him, why did you marry her? And he said, because she was the first woman who was nice to me. He always had a problem with women. He regarded himself as not attractive at all. He regarded women as being pretty mean to him or indifferent to him. And this was the first woman who did not show that. So he married her.
like to thank my husband Fred for letting me come today. I love to say that because it irritates the women's livers more than anything that I say.
Phyllis Schlafly was a colorful, dynamic, anti-feminist, right-wing reactionary.
As Ginny Lamp was growing up, Phyllis Schlafly was a role model. Her mother, Marjorie, was a prominent member of Schlafly's group.
The American women do not want ERA, they do not want abortion, they do not want lesbian privileges, and they do not want universal child care in the hands of the government.
What she saw in Phyllis Schlafly and her mom was no excuses. You don't need affirmative action. You don't need women's kind of special accommodations. You make your own fate, you create your own path, and you lean in. It doesn't have to be the liberal way. You can also do it the Republican way.
They were waging a battle against the ERA, Equal Rights Amendment.
This one woman, Schlafly, pretty much single-handedly stopped a whole movement and killed the Equal Rights Amendment. It really was an example of what you could do as a conservative woman leading a crusade.
And we can build this into a mighty movement that can set America on the right path. Then conquer we must. For our cause it is just, and this be our motto, in God is our trust.
Her mama was wrong for that.
Ginny's inspired. She wants to go into politics. She wants to go to law school.
Her mama wanted to
She wants to be like
the
this
poor.
and like her mom.
Her mama was wrong
Ginny
for that.
watched as her mom ran for the state
all the rest of them
legislature
right-wingers. They
and
wrong.
wrote dozens of letters to the editor of the local newspaper.
Aren't you all getting sick and tired of the news media and liberals taking off in all directions to persecute Republicans, particularly President Nixon and Vice President Agnew? Mrs. Donald G. Lamp.
By 12, Ginny was writing her own letters.
I am 12 years old, but I don't understand why they can ban all products with cyclamates in them when they aren't even sure they cause cancer. Why don't they ban cigarettes? They know cigarettes cause cancer. Ginny Lamp.
She would become a page at the Republican Women's Conference,
The great silent majority.
following her mom to see Richard Nixon.
My fellow Americans, I ask for your support.
Instead of, as so many teenagers do, faced with that at that time, reject it and go get high and wear jeans and tell their parents to get out of here, she obviously embraced it and kept embracing it and never stopped embracing it. It's simply saying, yes, Mom and Dad, I'm just like you and I'm proud to be just like you.
In many families, you don't talk about politics at the dinner table, right? But that was important to her parents. And it leads to that manichaeistic view between good and evil. And if you look at things in terms of good and evil, you end up angry, you're bitter, you don't accept defeats. And so it takes you to a really dark place when politics is your focus.
And see, she was a rebel. Clarence Thomas, he went against his own people too. But at least she stayed for her people.
After Holy Cross, Clarence Thomas was off to a very different world once
no matter
again.
how much ridicule
Yale Law School.
you got as a child just because they called you ABC, America's Blackest
It
Child.
was a chance to leave Pinpoint far
no
behind,
reason to go against
defy his
your own
grandfather's
people's civil
prophecy,
rights.
and get positioned
Just like I
to
said,
make
I was
real money.
ridiculed about skin color,
We know what
colorism
the
too,
reputation
but I
of
wouldn't
Yale
vote
is.
against my people's
You
rights
got
in the
a
government.
network of folks in all walks of life in the legal community, and all you got to say is, man, I'm a Yale alum, and bam, you got a job. That was our perception.
He had thought, well, you know what? I just go make me a bunch of money, maybe go to New York and be a lawyer.
He and Kathy moved into married student housing. They made a connection with their neighbor.
We were both in married student housing. He set up his study room in what should have been, a joint storage room.
His classmate, John Bolton, would become UN ambassador, Undersecretary of State, and National Security Advisor.
And we started talking and talked for the next 2 years, basically, and that's where we got to know each other.
Over time, Thomas would open up to Bolton.
I don't think he was terribly happy at the law school. Look, people at Yale Law School, generically speaking, are a pretty arrogant group. They think that they're going to rule the world. For example, in the year ahead of us were Bill and Hillary Clinton. That was kind of the atmosphere. I don't think Clarence came with that in mind for himself. And I think it was kind of off-putting.
There are other black students there, but again, the black students who are there, like he doesn't feel they are like him.
I believe
he's not part of the elite.
Allegedly,
they're, in his mind, privileged kids, you know, the sons and daughters of doctors and lawyers.
Set up.
So he feels, again, like the outcast.
He possibly was set up with that white girl.
He believed that people assumed he was there as a beneficiary of affirmative action, and it grated on him.
In the politics in Washington,
he has this feeling of, oh, I'm around these white students who he senses question his presence
so
at
he
Yale.
would vote the way they wanted
How is
him
it
to
that
vote.
you, not just you, Clarence Thomas, but you, all you black students are here?
And he ain't have no legal
Is it because of merit
education,
or is it because of affirmative
action? As far
action?
as I know, he didn't have no legal education.
There was one law professor, Ralph Winter, who, in a challenging way, mentioned this. People don't think, you know, you deserve to be here, that kind of thing. And Thomas doesn't take it as a challenge; he takes it as a slight.
Rather than try to fit in, Thomas tried to stand out.
He dressed in overalls and a t-shirt. It was kind of a uniform. But neither one of us was terribly rich, so I didn't wear overalls, but I understood what it meant for him.
With Clarence Thomas, what you see is somebody who's isolating himself. And he's kind of saying, you know, I don't want to try to join you, maybe because he doesn't want to be rejected again.
After 3 years of Yale Law School, graduation was nearing. But Clarence Thomas wasn't getting the offers he expected from prestigious law firms.
He was saying that he wasn't getting the kind of offers that other students were getting. And we couldn't understand it. We thought that, well, you know, you're at Yale, and if you're not getting offers, something's wrong, you know, because that's the whole purpose of going to those schools.
Thomas would never forget the sting of those rejections.
He said he would keep stacks of rejection letters he had gotten from law firms. Even when he was like a Supreme Court justice, he had these letters just to sort of remind him of those, again, this feeling of rejection by kind of the elite law firms.
He had his Yale law degree, and he had a 10-cent stamp stuck to it. You know, like a 10-cent price tag stuck to it. Because he's like, yeah, this is what it's worth, right? 10 cents, right? No more.
He came to blame affirmative action for the rejection he felt.
Now I knew what a law degree from Yale was worth when it bore the taint of racial preference. I was humiliated and desperate.
He thought that his degree was devalued, that he didn't get the same kind of cachet out of the degree once he was looking for a job and trying to move in his career. He assumed that others were assuming that it's a Yale law degree, but with an asterisk next to it.
I disagree. I disagree totally.
Orion Douglas had a strikingly similar academic journey to Clarence Thomas's. Scholarship to Holy Cross, law school, eventually becoming a judge.
I ain't gonna blame affirmative action for not getting a job when you never was offered the job for 100 years before, okay? The system was still there. The infrastructure for separation, discrimination was still there. It was still the segregated mindset of white America.
It ain't because he was had affirmative action. They denied him because he was black. They denied Clarence Thomas those jobs. After when he was in law school, he thought he should be getting some job offers.
Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign rocked the world of conservative Republicans.
Not because of affirmative action, in my opinion.
They called it a revolution.
Just that
And
judge,
Ginny
his
and her
friend
mom
said the
were
same
there,
thing. His friend, his college
watching as Reagan
classmate,
used
said the
a
same
catchy
thing.
phrase to
And
describe
he
it.
ended up getting job offers.
For those who've abandoned hope,
So he said some
we'll
job offers
restore
he
hope
didn't
and
get
we'll
either.
welcome them into a
He
great
said he was
national
denied because he
crusade
was
to
black.
make America great again.
And that's why
Ginny headed to
Clarence Thomas
Washington,
voted against
hoping to do her part,
affirmative action.
break into
He's
politics.
wrong for that. It's going on in the court system now. Look it up.
I spoke to her
in the
brother,
Supreme
Russell,
Court system now.
and he said,
With
the Mom was a big politician
some of
and
them
Ginny wanted
Asians
to
up
be
in
like
there.
Mom. And I think Ginny actually came to Washington thinking that she might run for Congress one day.
She was prodigious. She worked very hard, morning, noon, and night, and
But Washington was a far cry from life in Omaha.
She got to Washington bright-eyed and idealistic from the Midwest, and her mom and dad weren't there, her older siblings weren't around. It's easy to get lost in Washington. People drink, people sleep with their bosses, people do all kinds of crazy things.
During this time, Ginny suffered a traumatic experience, something she later described in People magazine.
I was once sexually harassed at work. It wasn't verbal harassment, it was physical. It was something I had put way down in the recesses of my mind.
She had mentioned to me that she'd had an incident with sexual harassment. She didn't want to get into the details of it, so I didn't know much about it. I just knew that there had been some trauma involved, and she was someone who felt kind of alone in the world and was looking for not only companionship, but for the tools that she needed to reattach to the world, to create the relationships that she thought would make her healthier.
She was drawn to a controversial self-help group called LifeSpring.
In your life, up until now, whether you consider yourself successful or not, you've really done the best you can. This program is an invitation for you to open up new areas for success.
The program gave her a sense of belonging, a group of other searcher-type people who felt lost or lonely, who now came together and go through a deeply intense experience of exposing their emotions to one another, hugging a lot, crying together.
It does not hurt, it feels wonderful. I'm okay.
She was deeply impressed. She felt that she had been reborn almost. It was a spiritual, religious experience for her.
At first, Ginny was feeling pretty good about it and felt like it was maybe, strengthening her. But then there were some troubling exercises.
Nobody ever helped me.
One of them was something called the stripper, where they stood in a U shape and they disrobed, they took off their clothes, and they made fun of people's bodies and the fat people. And she realized that this was sort of more than just spiritual journey, that this was some kind of cult-like stripping down of the self, and it was dangerous.
Ginny's parents and closest friends were also worried.
Ginny felt that she'd been misled, led astray, and so she wanted to get out. And she turned to a deprogrammer, a counselor, for help in getting out.
Hi, I was in LifeSpring, and I was what I considered to be deprogrammed. And
she was somebody who had been to hell and back, and she was going to stand up and speak publicly about, about saving others from a similar fate.
When you come away from a cult, you have to find yourself, and what was it that made you get into that group, and what open questions are there that still need to be answered.
She was angry that she had fallen victim to a group like this. When she goes into something, she does it fully, with all her heart. And when she leaves something and feels betrayed and angry, she is against it with all her heart.
So all those things that got me to last year are still there. And I guess I struggle with not going overboard and fighting in cults, but I know that's important too.
I spoke to her minister, and I guess he gave me the greatest insight into her. He said that she's a very, very trusting person that you have to be careful with. He told me that he thought it was that kind of trusting quality that led her to LifeSpring, that she believed in them until she was burned.
Want nobody fault but her fault.
How are you?
Pressing the wrong people.
I got
All
it.
she had to do was take it as a lesson learned.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, President. I appreciate it.
And Clarence Thomas
He
was
was
so
38
happy.
years old in the Oval Office with the President of the United States.
He's one of the highest ranking African American officials in the government. And he's seen as someone, certainly on the rise. People already are eyeing him, thinking, well, maybe we could get this guy prepared for a Supreme Court seat.
He'd paid his dues by being the front man for Reagan on issues of race.
I think that the president has really been treated unfairly in the media with respect to his views of minorities.
Especially affirmative action, which Thomas came to see as deeply flawed and insincere.
Where you do run into the conflict is when you have a system set up under the guise of affirmative action that is called preferential treatment.
He's playing the role of a black conservative. He's playing the role of a black Reaganite.
The president has been singularly supportive. He supports us where it counts.
He's giving the Reagan administration cover so that when people say, the Reagan administration is racist, Reagan said, well, you can't say that. Look at these people over here. Look at this guy, Clarence Thomas. He's black.
I support you. I'll do anything to make this happen.
Look at what he's saying. He's with us.
Thank you. Just spending my career. I'm a little bit nervous. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, President.
For Clarence Thomas,
There you go, right there. You see that symbol? He put the OK, it looked like an OK symbol, the 666 symbol. That sign right there. Some people use that symbol it means something else. And Clarence Thomas told him. He said he was so excited. He said he told former President Reagan, he said, I'll do anything. And then he put up the 666 symbol. He was so happy just because he gave him a box of jelly beans. Jelly beans that didn't cost nothing but probably $3. And he sold out his soul for a box of jelly beans. Sold it out against his own people.
it had been a long journey to the White House. Unable to get a prestigious job out of law school, he'd settled for a low-paying job as a staff lawyer for the Republican Attorney General from Missouri, Jack Danforth.
When I first met Clarence.
Okay, that's where he got some of his legal experience, a staff lawyer. But I don't believe he got his lawyer license. He got some experience as a staff lawyer. That's not the same as a license. I'm gonna look it up before the end of this video and see if he actually got his law license. But he's wrong. You saw what he did and how he said he was against affirmative action back in the 80s when black people really needed affirmative action. We still need affirmative action today, 2023. He was wrong for that, and he know he was wrong. That's why he looks terrible now. Back then, before he sold out and was against affirmative action and civil rights, he was even against his own civil rights for the in the 60s. He was against the civil rights of the 60s. He was against the affirmative action. But before he sold out against affirmative action in the civil rights, he was a handsome man. He used to look handsome when he was in the college fighting with the Black Panthers. He was a handsome black man. He was married to a black woman. He was handsome then. You can look back and see on his wedding pictures, he was beautiful. But when he turned ugly, it was when he spoke out against his own people. That's when he turned ugly. You can see it.
I told him that I would offer him more work on less pay than anybody else interviewing at Yale Law School, and he took the job.
He followed Danforth to the United States Senate, where he worked as a staffer.
Danforth offers Clarence Thomas a job in Washington, which is kind of a turning point in Clarence Thomas's career. He has said that he wants to be a big courtroom litigator and make a ton of money, but that's not really happening.
That's
I
why
think at this point, what you can see is he's ambitious.
That's how he ended up being his
He
friend.
decides maybe he can make it in government. He can get to the top there faster than in corporate America.
But as he rose in Washington, there was trouble in his personal life.
Moving to Washington had done nothing to ease the dissatisfaction I felt with my marriage. I hated myself for my inability to be the loving, devoted husband Kathy deserved.
His marriage was falling apart. He was struggling to raise his young son and dealing with crippling debt.
They're young. They had a son early. It was very difficult, I think, to keep that marriage together in the early years, and I think they just kind of drifted apart.
I grew despondent and resigned. I drank more heavily than ever before. I knew I was on the road to trouble.
When I first met Clarence, he, more than anything else, is a very angry person. He was self-medicating when I met him with alcohol.
Lillian McEwen was a lawyer for Senator Joe Biden on the Judiciary Committee. She met Thomas as he was going through a divorce.
Clarence was in the midst of a lot of changes in his life. And so I would pretty much just listen to whatever it was that he had to say about his childhood, about what was going on with him.
As they began dating, Lillian found Clarence to be ambitious and determined.
I would say that every act that Clarence performed at work and socially was always geared toward getting ahead and making sure that he was doing what was necessary to take the next step, whatever that was.
The idea has already occurred to him by 1981 that if he plays his cards right, he could be on the Supreme Court. He's telling people that. 1981. This is so long before it happens. But he's got a plan in the back of his mind. And he knows that he needs to keep doing the right things, punching the right cards, meeting the right people, making the right friends. And it might happen.
One important step. He had joined a small circle of conservative Black Republicans.
You're an ambitious, Black person. You have a Yale Law School degree. Makes a lot of sense to go where the line is shorter. So it's a long line, with the Democrats. A lot of people over there. Much shorter line with the Republicans.
He'd been tilting conservative since leaving law school, and now began to flesh out his conservative ideology. He reconnected with his former Yale classmate.
At one point, he said, "Can you send me some books or something that might be worth reading?" And so I put together a bunch of things I thought he might be interested in reading and sent him out. I think he went through clearly an evolution. He had certainly become much more conservative, really outside of Yale Law School, out in the real world.
You've heard about Clarence Thomas, but not by name. He is one of the Black people now on center stage in American politics. He is a Republican.
Thomas would put himself in the spotlight, making controversial comments in the Washington Post.
Thomas is also a man who has a sister on welfare back in his home state of Georgia, but he feels that he must be opposed to welfare because of the dependency it can breed in a person. She, his sister, gets mad when the mailman is late with her welfare check, he says. That is how dependent she is. What's worse is that now her kids feel entitled to the check too. They have no motivation for doing better or getting out of that situation.
It hit pretty hard. Folks in Savannah, their first reaction was, why would you talk about your sister in public? You know, we don't do that. That's not Black Savannah. You know, if you got something to say about your sister, you don't like what she did or whatever, you don't publicize that. You know, you keep that in the family.
But in Reagan's Washington, the article propelled Thomas.
Ronald Reagan, was famous for denouncing welfare queens. So, wow, here is, a Yale Law School graduate who's African American and who's talking about how terrible it is that his sister was on welfare. That was like manna from heaven for Ronald Reagan.
Reagan elevated Thomas to run the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
This is a real journey that Clarence Thomas makes from modest, humble origins to the top of one's profession and ultimately to a leading position in American government.
Now, for the first time in his life, Clarence Thomas was in charge. But people who knew him then saw disturbing changes.
His personality, his aggressiveness sexually, everything changed. He became a different person after he got that job. He stopped drinking alcohol, so he was not self-medicating anymore. And his mood swings were quite obvious.
He never really seemed to be anyone who took any particular joy in anything unless it was denigrating someone or somebody, and then he'd just guffaw after he made such a comment.
Angela Wright was Thomas's communications director.
I think he really, really wanted to just sort of prove to conservative white people that, he was their guy. He just took such pride in denigrating Black people. He is taking stereotypes and laughing at them and making white people feel comfortable in his presence because he's the first one to make the racial joke.
He comes up with derogatory nicknames for people. He bullies some of the weaker people. He makes fun of them. He's supposed to be running an organization that protects, for instance, older people in the workplace. And he tells his underlings to get rid of an older guy in the office because he's too old. He says he's got one foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel.
There was a woman on his staff who was a little person. And I remember him specifically saying, forgive my language, but this is what he said. She got that big ass. Despite the fact that sexual harassment was against the law, people just let it roll off.
Eventually, Thomas fired Angela Wright, and Lillian McEwen concluded she'd had it with Clarence.
I just couldn't tolerate it anymore. I didn't like what he was becoming. I didn't like the speeches that he was giving. I didn't like the positions that he was taking. I didn't like the embrace that he was getting from the most horrible people in the Republican Party. I couldn't tolerate it. This was his plan. This was his karma. This was how he wanted to go through the world. But I wanted nothing to do with it.
Jenny Lamp finally met the man of her dreams.
We first met in the spring of 1986 at an affirmative action conference in New York City. Clarence was then EEOC chairman. I was a labor relations attorney at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
When she sat in that meeting with him for the first time and saw him, what she saw, in her own words, was a powerful man.
And they kind of strike up a friendship at this conference. They're both there speaking. They get a cab together, and that kind of, touches off this romance.
She shared a taxi with him to the airport. When she asked him, how do you feel about being a black man in the Reagan administration? How do you deal with critics? And he pulled out his wallet and showed her the prayers that he recites every day that kind of fortify him.
Keep a clear eye toward life's end. Do not forget your purpose and destiny as God's creature.
She said it was a humbling experience seeing a person who lived their values, their Christian values. For her, I think that was the moment of connection.
Just a few months later, Ginny and Clarence were engaged.
The whole thing is so improbable. It's a novel. It's a novel I wouldn't believe. It's just that these people in such dissimilar worlds end up getting together and being of such enormous political consequence. You can't make it up. It's so extraordinary.
But they had important similarities.
Clarence Thomas is at odds with the civil rights movement. He's against affirmative action. Ginny Thomas is at odds with the feminist movement, and she's opposed to equal pay for women. In some ways, they really have a lot in common, politically, and in terms of sort of where they position themselves in sort of opposition to the politics of their own generation.
Soon, out in Omaha, Ginny Lamp became Ginny Thomas.
When she got married to Justice Thomas back in Omaha, she didn't tell people that she was marrying a black man. She just said, I'm getting married. And so the guests show up at the wedding and they're shocked that she's marrying a black guy. And one of her relatives was quoted in the Washington Post as saying, well, we were surprised when he turned out to be black, but when we got to know him, he's so good to her that it made up for him being black. And so it was obvious this person and maybe others thought him being black was a bad thing.
Those who knew him from his Black Power days at Holy Cross were also surprised.
Thomas, when he was a student at Holy Cross, he was sort of adamantly opposed to interracial marriage. He thought that black people should marry black people and, we should embrace this community. And he would even point out interracial couples.
I find it a little ironic to evolve from that position to being married to a white lady. Okay, well, that's how life does it. I never thought when he was at Holy Cross that he'd be part of Ronald Reagan's team also. But you follow the path that God puts before us. And I guess God sent him to Ginny. I don't know. I'll leave that up between them.
A stunning decision at the Supreme Court. Thurgood Marshall announced his retirement from the Supreme Court today.
On a court that's leaning to the conservative right, his departure signals a major change for the court.
The great Thurgood Marshall, Mr. Civil Rights, retires.
I'm old. I'm getting old and coming apart.
The search is on for a Supreme Court nominee with the retirement of Justice Thurgood Marshall.
Is the president expecting pressure to appoint another black American?
You bet he is, Peter. I think that pressure is bound to be forthcoming.
The Washington rumor mill has gone into overdrive this morning, trying to...
President Bush said he would pick someone representative of all Americans.
But should that person be black?
Well, I am very pleased to announce that I will nominate Clarence Thomas to serve as Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
Clarence Thomas is nominated. Now, immediately there's certain things that happen that, get my attention. First, did race have anything to do with this?
What I did was look for the best man, and the fact that he is black and a minority has nothing to do with this, in the sense that he is the best qualified at this time. And
Well, who believes that? Clarence Thomas stands to be one of the great beneficiaries in American life of affirmative action.
President.
He was only 43 years old. He'd spent just 1 year as a federal appeals court judge. But he'd built a strong reputation as a conservative and strong connections with Washington Republicans.
He got that through networking. He was in the right place at the right time. He had the right support people behind him. He was connected pretty well.
He had settled on the 43-year-old appeals court judge, Clarence Thomas, replacing the court's first and only African-American with another African-American.
Reaction has been flowing and ricocheting ever since.
Clarence Thomas is a self-made man with many self-made enemies.
Liberals have been scared about Clarence Thomas for years. What impact will Clarence Thomas have on the High Court?
I thought I'd be able to sneak in. Oh, shit. Thanks. Thanks, man.
He could not have been prepared for the mob of still photographers, TV cameras, reporters, police, and senators which engulfed him this morning.
It promises to be a political, ideological, and cultural event of historic proportions.
The hearing will come to order. Good morning, Judge. Welcome to the blinding lights.
The Democrats, politically, they were in a very difficult position. It's very difficult to attack an African-American judge, and they wanted to befriend him, not attack him.
God bless you for it.
Certainly that was true for Biden.
Heck, you're 6-7 years younger than I'm 48. How old are you, Judge? 42, 3?
Well, I've aged over the last 10 weeks, but 43.
43 years old.
He was advised, I know this, to be very careful, to be very modest. They're going to ask you about every controversial issue that has ever come before the Supreme Court.
In the area of civil rights, I don't remember or recall participating.
He's told to just basically sit there like a potted plant and don't say too much. It's insulting in a way, but he does what he's told.
I think that to take a position would undermine my ability to be impartial.
There did come a point at which people said, well, hold it. Maybe you don't know enough to be a justice.
Would undermine my impartiality, really undermine my ability to be impartial.
It was just laughable.
Clarence Thomas basically played the role so well as a cipher that he'd said things that seemed just on the surface very hard to believe, such as that he had never, ever debated the Roe v. Wade decision.
What I'm trying to do, Senator, is to respond to your question and at the same time not offer a particular view on this difficult issue of abortion that would undermine my impartiality.
It plays into his fears, if you will, because he's very sensitive, more than that, to how people perceive him. Right? He worries about how people see him as a black man. So that had to bother him.
But as the hearings concluded, it seemed like confirmation was imminent. Senator Jack Danforth had shepherded Thomas through the process.
I can remember thinking, well, we've got, however many votes. There was no question that he was going to get confirmed. So we've got this. So it was I just felt, I didn't feel threatened that there was any threat at all.
Clarence Thomas ran into trouble today.
Questions are growing over charges of sexual harassment against Thomas.
The FBI did indeed interview Anita Hill, a former subordinate of Thomas's.
The effect was to create chaos and a great deal of uncertainty about what would happen to Clarence Thomas's nomination.
With the potential for political explosion on Capitol Hill.
It was one of those explosions where no one in Washington knew what was going to happen, not even the White House.
Trouble today for Clarence Thomas. Enough trouble that some senators are calling for a postponement of this week's confirmation vote.
These 11th hour sexual harassment charges stunned Washington.
I went out to his house. There was a big media stakeout outside of his house.
That was excellent. Excellent driving.
And so I went in. I have never had an experience like that. Ever. Still haven't. Because he was a broken man. He was just broken. He couldn't sleep, according to his wife. He was in a fetal position in bed. He couldn't eat. And it was, boy. I mean, to see somebody you care about suffering that much. And
he was embarrassed.
It was just terrible.
I lay across the bed and curled up in a fetal position, tired beyond imagining. I felt like a marathon runner who had hit the wall. All my reserves were used up.
He was tired. He was embarrassed. He was embarrassed about the sexual harassment and the embarrassment he caused his wife. He was embarrassed that he got caught flirting with a black woman, even though he was married to this sellout white woman. However you want to say it, she was wrong because she was against anybody really, because if you're against black people, you're against anybody, because you should have some kindness in your heart. She was against black people. She was against welfare mothers, poor women. Talking about don't give no women no assistance, knowing darn well that she came from a rich family. She didn't need assistance, but if she was poor, she would have wished she had that assistance too. But Clarence Thomas did all that working, trying to satisfy other people, trying to satisfy what white people thought about him ever since he was a child in the Catholic school. He was trying to satisfy the white teacher. He was trying to satisfy them white friends, all them white boys that was calling him names, nigger, and making fun of Martin Luther King. He was trying to satisfy all them white folks. He was trying to satisfy the white presidents and all them people in the White House. He was trying to satisfy them lawyers and that white lawyer that hired him. He was trying to satisfy all of them, and he was making the money, but he was tired because he wasn't taking care of himself. He was busy working and trying to work for the white man instead of helping his own people, and they drained him. They drained his soul. When you sell your soul, they take your soul. No wonder he was tired.
Stage is set for what everyone anticipates will be a brutal hearing.
Later that week, Anita Hill testified.
Now in the nation's capital and before the world, an emotional dispute of historic proportions.
Professor, do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
I remember this. I was around 17 years old, and it was all on the TV about this Anita Hill trial and Clarence Thomas. I was 17. I didn't understand the significance of it. I thought he was already on the Supreme Court, the way they was making a big hoopla about it. But come to find out now, watching this documentary, and going over it and making this video with you, come to find out, they did all of this to see what they nominate him and going ahead and appoint him as a Supreme Court justice. He was nominated, but they did all of this to see what they appoint him as a Supreme Court justice. And then Anita Hill came out about the sexual harassment charges. Now I understand how wrong it was for them to go ahead and appoint him, because this woman came out and said how he treated her in the workplace, and plus how he voted against affirmative action. Of course, no, they shouldn't have appointed him. And after all, and you see, look and see, I'm gonna keep continuing to play, but you can see how angry they was looking at Clarence Thomas. They was looking at Clarence Thomas so angry because they was disappointed that all this orgy mess came out. They wanted to keep it hush hush. The so-called Illuminati wanted to keep it hush hush behind the rich mansion walls and behind the mansion doors. They wanted to keep their orgies and whatever sick mess, pervert mess they was doing behind the doors, and the skeletons in the closets. They wanted to keep it closed in the closet and hush hush. But Anita Hill spoke out. Now I see more of what she did. Back then they didn't even say about the orgy she talked about in the news. See, now the front line bringing it all out. They bring it all out now because of this corruption and money scandal that's going on now in 2023. But back then they didn't say nothing about Anita Hill saying that Clarence Thomas invited her to an orgy and all of this stuff allegedly. Back then they said that she was complaining that Clarence Thomas put a pubic hair on a Coke can. And that's all they kept talking about on the news back then. When I was 17, they kept saying about a pubic hair on a Coke can, making it seem as if it was something funny. And now I realize that it wasn't nothing funny about none of that. They shouldn't have nominated him, and they shouldn't have appointed him, because he wasn't fair. I'm going to keep it going. Like and subscribe, please. Like and subscribe to support our channel. Like and subscribe.
Mr. Chairman,
Thomas was at home.
members of the committee,
He told Ginny he wouldn't watch,
my name is Anita F. Hill.
but she did.
His conversations were very vivid. He spoke about acts that he had seen in pornographic films involving such matters as women having sex with animals and films showing group sex or rape scenes.
It was incredibly compelling television. You know, she was gorgeous, composed, obviously projecting sincerity.
On other occasions, he referred to the size of his own penis as being larger than normal, and he also spoke on some occasions of the pleasures he had given to women with oral sex. He said that if I ever told anyone of his behavior, that it would ruin his career.
There's an anger and suspicion that washes over Ginny Thomas. She sees others attacking her husband, attacking her, attacking their core beliefs. She sees that outside world that's attacking her as something that needs to be beaten down, as something that needs to be destroyed.
It was spiritual warfare, good versus evil. We were fighting something we didn't understand. We needed God.
It's a reprisal of the kind of ideology Ginny Thomas had from her Birch Society days. They regarded their opponents as enemies and practically, satanic.
From the nomination.
So she says you've got to fight back against these sort of evil tormentors.
That night, the Thomases traveled back to the Capitol, to Jack Danforth's office.
We sat with Thomas. He was Jack, Danforth, Thomas. There weren't very many people in the room. And I just looked over and I said, "Did this happen?" He said, I'm torn to bits. This didn't happen. And I told him my theory of political life: an attack unanswered is an attack believed. Not only that, but agreed to. And he was teary.
I told him that he should go up and look at the senators, and Senator Ted Kennedy was on that program, and he should quote the Bible, and he should say, "Judge not that you be not judged, condemn not that you be not condemned," senators. He wouldn't say that.
Thomas had something else in mind.
He just sat there in my office, and it was darkened and it was quiet. That was when he said to me, "Jack, you know what this is? It's a lynching. It's a high-tech lynching." I said, "Clarence, if that's the way you feel, go up and say it."
The hearing will come to order.
Clarence Thomas had people standing behind him, first and foremost his wife, who, by her presence, made it obvious that she believed that these were lies. She had to be there.
I felt such anger and revulsion looking at some of those senators. I was watching them and I felt like my eyes were laser beams. They wouldn't look at me. These little people, they seemed so small, and our purpose seemed so great.
Judge, it's a tough day and tough night for you, I know. Let me ask, do you have anything you'd like to say? Do you have anything you'd like to say?
Senator, I would like to start by saying unequivocally, uncategorically, that I deny each and every single allegation against me today that suggested in any way that I had conversations of a sexual nature or about pornographic material with Anita Hill, that I ever attempted to date her, that I ever had any personal sexual interest in her, or that I in any way ever harassed her.
His testimony was very much, sort of absolute, against stark, black and white. Nope. I can't think of a way of reconciling the stories, right? That wouldn't mean that someone perjured, but clearly someone lied.
I think that this today is a travesty. I think that it is disgusting. I think something is dreadfully wrong with this country.
That's the real Clarence Thomas. They've come for me at the jugular, and I'm a man. I am a man here before you. I'm furious about the way I'm being treated. You're going to do what you're going to do, but I'm going to hold a dignified line in defense of my integrity.
This is a circus. It's a national disgrace. And from my standpoint, as a Black American, as far as I'm concerned, it is a high-tech lynching. You will be lynched, destroyed, caricatured by a committee of the U.S. Senate rather than hung from a tree.
And everything was on the line. He knew what to say. High-tech lynching. There are a lot of people who rush to his side. They disagree with him. They disagree with him about lots of things. But he blew that whistle, and there were lots of Black people who immediately went to his side.
We're sitting there saying, give it to him, Clarence. Give it to him. We done been here before. We had to live through this in Savannah. When they try to beat you down, what do? You fight back. That's the way we do it here. And so we were very proud of him, and we were roaring him on.
That's what narcissists do.
In a moment,
They
the
blame
politics
the
had
victim.
changed. Chairman Biden and the committee moved quickly.
On this vote,
The yeas are 52, and the nays are 48.
Within days, Clarence Thomas had realized his ambitions.
The nomination of Clarence Thomas of Georgia is hereby confirmed.
A permanent seat on the United States Supreme Court. But he would never forget those who had opposed him.
He invited me to come and visit him in his chambers. And if I were a novelist, this is how I would paint the scene. He sits back in his chair, he puts his feet up on his desk, he takes a puff on the cigar, he says, I'm gonna be here forever. They've had their say. Now, in my leisure, I will have my say. I'm here, I'm planted, they're gonna have to deal with me. I'll be here forever. He was gonna get his, as it were, revenge simply by putting one foot in front of the other day in, day out, year in and year out. And they can make all the noise, they can scream like banshees. They can scream, but the fact of the matter is, I'm gonna be writing those opinions.
He knew that if he got in there, he'd be appointed for life. They appointed the Supreme Court people for life.
He spoke about acts that he had seen in pornographic films.
The Anita Hill allegations would not go away.
I deny each and every single allegation against me today.
Well, I'm just sitting there thinking, I'm just saying, this man is a liar, is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, lie.
Biden's committee never.
He made it on. He made it on the Supreme Court just because he gave a good speech to them white folks, and then white folks didn't want to admit that Anita Hill told the truth. So that's why they went on ahead and appointed him on the Supreme Court, and that was the most evilest, dangerous thing they should have did. They should have just went on and admitted what Anita Hill did was right, and they should have appointed somebody else because. Uncle Tom is no good to nobody. Uncle Tom ain't good to the black people, and Uncle Tom ain't good to the white folks. It destroys the whole system.
Called Angela Wright or a number of other witnesses to testify.
The comments range from pressing me about why I didn't go out with him to remarks about my personal appearance.
Anita Hill is probably telling the truth because I can remember him asking me what size my boobs were, asking me about going out with him, even though I'd expressed no interest in going out with him.
There were other women, and they didn't get a chance to testify. There was the speechwriter, the older woman, Rose Jourdain, who talked to Angela Wright about her experiences. There was a woman named Kay Savage, who was willing to describe that she'd gone to Clarence Thomas's apartment and that he had a huge interest in pornography.
I deny that I had conversations about pornographic material with Anita Hill.
Watching as well, Lillian McEwen, who dated Thomas during his time at the EEOC.
Clarence is one of those guys who look at women as sexual objects. That's it. And he doesn't bother to hide it.
He talked about pornographic materials depicting individuals with large penises or large breasts.
He had stacks of magazines with pictures of genitalia and also women's huge breasts. That was pretty much what was men's and women's genitalia. That was pretty much what his collection consisted of.
For others, it was the little details that stood out.
He went over to his desk to get the coat, looked at the can, and asked, "Who has put pubic hair on my coat?"
I heard him say that before. He said it before. We were in the Hogan Campus Center, and a group of us black students were walking by, and he says, "Oh, look, is that pubic hair on a Coke can?" Those were the exact words he used then, and I heard it later on when Anita Hill spoke it. So I believe what she said. She was telling the truth.
He liked adult films. he made jokes. Thomas was inappropriate and things like that. That all stack up on Anita Hill's side of the ledger. So, I think if I had to say who lied, it was Thomas.
Both Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas were under oath. So one of them was perjuring themselves. And the problem was, if the person who was lying was Clarence Thomas, it was someone who was going to be one of 9 of the most important judges in America for the rest of his life and for decades to come. Somebody with enormous unchecked power, somebody who could decide the fate of many, many other people. So much was hanging in the balance, and it has ever since.
You see what I told you? And Anita Hill, I believe she was telling the truth, just like those women said, and the men said they heard him say it too. Okay, Anita Hill, I believe she came out because she realized if Clarence Thomas was in there, he'd be in there until he died, and on the Supreme Court, and she felt like he probably wouldn't be fair, and that he was just going along to get along. And she also possibly wanted some limelight. She also wanted attention, but I believe, yes, she wanted attention. She was a beautiful woman, but she also wanted to expose how he was treating her, sexual harassment, and how she wanted it stopped. She was there to do a professional job. She was there to work. She wasn't there to be belittled and to be part of some sex orgy or some part of some political cult.
Clarence Thomas had prevailed, but he saw his accomplishment questioned, even dismissed once again.
Immediately after that confirmation in the early 1990s, I can remember some of these commentators dismissing him, writing him off, giving him the back of his hand, calling him second rate, stupid, incompetent, venal, and whatever.
There are other Black Americans that are out there that are qualified, that are right.
And I don't think he's qualified. I think he's a second-rate jurist and opportunist and not totally honest about a lot of things.
That's right. He was an opportunist. And there were plenty of other qualified Black judges or Black lawyers that would have been even more qualified than him without the sexual harassment and them whatever sexual ideas and things that he had. Even if he did have the sexual ideas and stuff, just because that was his idea of women, and that just showed his mind state. His mind state wasn't too healthy, and that's why they shouldn't put him in there. And you see what happened. Every vote that he did that came about African Americans or people of color rights, it seemed like he was voting against us. Ever since I was 17 years old, here I am in my early 50s, and we still struggling against racism when all of that should have been done. He even voted against the voting rights recently. And see, even though he skated and he got in there with the skin of his teeth, he got in there. You see how he looked guilty. He got in there with the skin of his teeth. But what they should have did was, what Clarence Thomas Wood should have did was stand up. What he should have did was from now on say, okay, I'm going to do what's right from now on. I made it through, even though I almost lost the position. But I made it through, and from now on, I'm going to vote what's right. From now on, I'm going to vote what's right for justice. And he should have repented and did what's right. But instead, he got in there and he did everything what those Republican white men wanted him to do against the Black community, to keep the Black community down, to keep the poor Black people down. But guess what? He can't keep us down for long because, like they say, the sun is always going to rise.
early years, Thomas was overshadowed by another conservative justice, Antonin Scalia.
You have Scalia, who is this gregarious, big, large figure and is the dominant conservative on the court.
Look, Scalia cast a giant shadow because he was Nino Scalia. He is one of the most powerful intellects ever to sit on the United States Supreme Court.
Many people looked at Thomas as kind of Scalia-like. Somebody that did not have the heft and the intellectual firepower and the ability to debate.
Thomas told people he stopped reading mainstream news. Instead, he relied on two primary sources, his wife and Rush Limbaugh.
Greetings and welcome back. Rush Limbaugh. I knew he didn't do it. I knew Clarence Thomas didn't do it. Anita Hill's stories about Clarence Thomas were not true.
He would listen to Rush Limbaugh as he was doing a long commute, and he would have court staff tape record it so he could listen to it when he was commuting.
Your attempt to assuage all of your white guilt by supporting Obama is worthless because you know he's not a real black. If any race of people should not have guilt about slavery, it's Caucasians.
The two became close friends.
The fear was, Clarence Thomas has confirmed he then becomes the most powerful, influential black man in America. And he's not a Democrat, and he's not a liberal.
Thomas even presided over one of Limbaugh's weddings.
Throughout his career, he's been willing to do things that were certainly eyebrow-raising. Justice Thomas, seemed to relish his close relationship with Rush Limbaugh as a way of, giving the finger to people who, he didn't like.
A misogynist is a guy who hates women almost as much as women hate women.
Thomas was establishing his place in the world of white conservative Republicans.
He found another group to accept him. He found the conservatives. He found the powerful. He found the rich.
He sold out.
He found all these other people who will accept him. And not necessarily because they like him, but because he's powerful.
One of those wealthy conservatives was Harlan Crow.
Harlan Crow has given millions of dollars to Republican candidates, and Crow has taken a special interest in funding groups that are involved specifically in trying to shape the law and the courts, trying to sort of push the law in a conservative direction.
Their friendship was commemorated with a painting.
This was a painting that Harlan Crow commissioned. We have Clarence Thomas and Harlan Crow both smoking cigars, and across from them is Leonard Leo. Leonard Leo is one of the leaders of the Federalist Society. He is widely regarded as, a principal architect of the Supreme Court and the judiciary's turn to the right.
Crow even helped fund a documentary that aired on PBS promoting Thomas as a humble man.
One of Clarence's biggest loves is when he can get away from Washington, D.C. and be on the road in his motorhome.
I don't have any problem with going to Europe, but I prefer the United States. I prefer the RV parks.
Comment below, let me know if a billionaire gave you millions of dollars and was your friend just so that you can vote against your own people, your own kind. Would you do it? Would you sell out your own people for millions of dollars? Comment below, yes or no.
And I prefer that. I prefer being around that.
But out of the public eye, Thomas was living a very different life.
Harlan Crow has been taking Clarence Thomas on luxury vacations really around the world for more than 20 years. So we're talking flights on his private jet, cruises on his very, very large yacht in places like Indonesia and New Zealand, stays at Harlan Crow's resort up in the Adirondacks.
If a rich billionaire
Compared
offered
to
give you $1
somebody
million
that's a
so that
partner
you vote
at a big
on
DC
the
law
right
firm that might be
wingers,
making $2 or $3
vote
million a
against your
year,
own
like these Supreme
people,
Court justices are
to
paupers.
hold black people down.
Thomas could not
If they offered you $1
afford
million, would you
to
sell out and
take the
take the $1
kinds of
million and vote against your
vacations
own people?
that Crow is taking him on.
Comment yes or no.
Crow has denied any
Comment
wrongdoing,
below.
and Thomas says he wasn't required to disclose who paid for the trips, which were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars.
It shows that he is comfortable accepting largesse at a scale that has no known precedent in the modern history of the U.S. Supreme Court.
So Clarence
And Crow
Thomas said
paid
he
tens of
wasn't
thousands of
required
dollars
to
for
record him. He
Thomas's
wasn't required.
grandnephew to attend private boarding schools. Crow also purchased Thomas's childhood home directly from him and other relatives.
After Crow bought Thomas's mother's house, she continued to live there for about going on 10 years now, which obviously puts Crow in
That
the rather
billionaire right
unusual
there,
position of being the
he did all
landlord,
of that for a
effectively,
reason.
to a sitting Supreme
He
Court
bought
justice's mother.
Clarence Thomas's mother's house.
Crow even gave Ginny Thomas's conservative advocacy group $500,000. It paid her a salary of $120,000.
When you have a friendship, even if it's a genuine friendship, and there's an enormous amount of money being spent by one party on gifts and real estate deals, that pushes the relationship into a totally different light.
They did all of that.
Crow and Thomas
He called
described their
himself a friend. He
relationship as a
probably
normal
eventually was
friendship,
a friend. Ain't no telling
but
what
their
else he
ties have
did
raised questions about the High Court's independence.
to sell out.
And Thomas's
Clarence Thomas
opinions
sold
have
out.
often been in
Ain't no
line with the
telling what else he
conservative
did. He
politics
probably
of
had
his
to
friends.
join the Illuminati, allegedly.
Gorvy
He probably
Bush,
had to join
he
in on
provided
those
one of the
orgies.
crucial 5
He
votes for
already liked
delivering the White House to the Republicans.
The Democrat Party
Ain't no telling
accused
what
the
else he
Supreme
did. He
Court
probably
of being
joined in
rigged
on the
for Bush.
Illuminati
He
sex
insisted that
parties
key
with
parts of the
torture
Voting
and
Rights Act were unconstitutional.
The
whatever else
end of a
kind
key
of
element of the
S&M
Voting
sex,
Rights
whatever they
Act of
like to do.
1965.
He argued
Allegedly,
against laws regulating guns.
What
the
the
last
Democrats
part of this
want,
video
your
had cut off. I
He
had told
called
you
for the
about
overturn
how
of Roe
my
versus
own
Wade.
cousin,
Roses are red, violets are
he
blue.
went
See
to
you
a black
later. I
college,
aborted you.
And
and he had to join the Skull and Bones, just like it says. Even in some of them white colleges, they have uh, sororities, and them sororities sometimes they make them join just so that they can say that they part of a sorority, and they think a sorority going to help them be part of an establishment and all of that. And it's not worth it if you got to sell out your own morals. Somebody that went to Bethune-Cookman College, he told me he went down there and they was recruiting black people to go down there. It's a black college in Florida. He told me in the Skull and Bones, he told me someone told him, and I believe he showed him a video. He went, somehow he found out because he was on the college. He said that in order to get in on the Skull and Bones sorority, they had to lay down in a coffin. He told me that they had to lay down in a coffin, and they had to lay in a coffin and masturbate to interracial pornographies. They had to jack off to interracial, like black men having sex with white women, pornography videos, bestiality, homosexual acts and stuff like that, and whatever they had to do, they did all of that mess, and they had to lay in a coffin, and they had to do that crazy nasty mess. Um, just to say that, okay, well, if you did these homosexual acts and you did these crazy sexual nude acts, and we recorded you on video, so that way if you go against what we want you to do, we're going to put these videos out. That was part of the Skull and Bones. And also it's known that the former President Bush, senior President George Bush, he was in the Skull and Bones. So this man, Clarence Thomas, I can't even say if he justice because he ain't gave us no justice yet. But Clarence Thomas, he talking, ain't no telling what he did. He already was addicted to pornography, like his ex-girlfriend said, the Asian woman. And that white woman, she didn't help. She probably had him doing all kinds of crazy stuff just to make her feel happy and to satisfy her money and whatever her family. Just like I said earlier, for all we know, it was probably a setup from the Illuminati for them to hook up. They went to some right wing um, meeting. It was probably meant set up for him to go to that meeting, and she was right there. And they sometimes that's how they do it. They get some white woman to walk up to a black man and introduce herself, and somehow that's how they get things going. She said that she was attracted. She probably was attracted after a while, but it was probably a whole plan all along to set up and to go ahead and get him into the Republicans and on the Supreme Court to make people think, oh, we got a black man in there, and to make black people think that we was getting our civil rights when he took all the civil rights away. Most of them, he can't take them all away. Like I said earlier, the video has stopped, but I'm recording this last part again. They can't stop the truth from coming out. And like I said earlier, they can't hold us down for long. They trying to hold the black people down for putting sellouts in there, and Clarence Thomas selling out to them white establishment racist right wingers peoples. They keep trying to hold us down, but they can't hold us down for long because the sun always rises, and the Lord is on good side. The Lord is on what's good. God is on what's the good side. Evil is on the devil's side. And Justice Thomas, he's gonna have to pay. He talking about he in there forever. He ain't gonna live forever, not on this earth. He ain't in there forever. Eventually, he gonna have to answer to God one day, and God is gonna be the real judge. And that's why I was saying it's not worth it. If somebody had gave me billions of dollars to sell out my own people, no, I wouldn't take the money. Because all that money ain't worth my soul going to hell for selling out your own people, selling your soul to the devil for evilness. No, it ain't worth it. I don't care if they gave me $1 million. I'd rather have peace of mind and be happy in my spirit with the Lord instead of knowing I sold out and people suffering and dying because of racism. I'm going to continue with the video. Thank you for watching. Thank you. If I'm upset, it's just temporary, just to get this message out. And I hope this helps somebody to realize that racism is real. And you need to vote against these right wingers. You need to teach your children the truth of what's really going on. And they need to stay with their own kind.
On one of his most personal issues, he declared he would ban affirmative action.
Affirmative action is not equality. Clarence Thomas, what a godsend. You give me a country run by Clarence Thomas, and I would sign up for it tomorrow.
Clarence Thomas should be ashamed of himself.
The closer Thomas aligned with the conservative world, the greater the divide with the politics and perspective of the world he'd grown up in.
My mama was on welfare.
Look, he voted against the Voting Rights Act. We grew up in Savannah when King was marching and struggling and dying to pass the Voting Rights Act.
The rest of her life because she had.
How can the African American community, how are they to perceive it? And why would he do it?
It helped my mama in 1981.
The end of a key element of the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
He argued against laws regulating guns.
What do Democrats want? Your guns.
He called for the overturn of Roe versus Wade.
Roses are red, violets are blue. See you later. I aborted you.
And on one of his most personal issues, He declared he would ban affirmative action.
Affirmative action is not equality. Clarence Thomas, what a godsend. You give me a country run by Clarence Thomas, and I would sign up for it tomorrow.
The closer Thomas aligned with the conservative world, the greater the divide with the politics and perspective of the world he'd grown up in.
Look, he voted against the Voting Rights Act. We grew up in Savannah when King was marching and struggling and died to pass the Voting Rights Act. How can the African American community, how are they to perceive it? And why would he do it? I think the overall opinion of the African American community was he's no longer us, he's them.
In many parts of Black America, he is not celebrated. In fact, in much of Black America, just the opposite. He's derided. His name stands for something. You know, to pull a Clarence Thomas, that means something. To pull a Clarence Thomas means to use your Blackness to, reach a high place and then turn your back on it. That is to pull a Clarence Thomas. Gosh, he knows that, and he cannot be happy with that.
You want to be thought of as a good Black man or woman, not as a traitor or a turncoat, a sellout. On the other hand, the idea that I will think for myself and I won't be told what to think just because of the color of my skin is one that very powerfully animated Clarence Thomas. If somebody's going to tell me I'm not Black because thinking for myself, I arrived at certain conclusions that they didn't like, you question my authenticity, you question my legitimacy, I take umbrage at that. I don't appreciate that.
Your call has been forwarded to an automatic voice message system. At the tone, please record your message.
Good morning, Anita Hill. It's Jenny Thomas, and I just wanted to reach across the airwaves and the years and ask you to consider something. I would love you to consider an apology sometime and some full explanation of why you did what you did with my husband.
It had been nearly 2 decades since the confirmation hearings.
So give it some thought. I certainly pray about this and hope that one day you'll help us understand why you did what you did. Okay, have a good day.
Jenny Thomas had been rising inside the Republican Party.
Republican politics keep moving toward her, and it keeps moving right. And there she is, right where it's moving, each step along the way.
The Republican revolution of election 94 moved the whole political landscape sharply to the right.
When hard-right Republicans seized control of the House, Jenny became an aide to one of the leaders, Dick Armey.
She shared my values, my beliefs, and my understanding of the world.
They called him Dr. No.
I enjoyed calling the left down. They're a bunch of damn clowns. I think they should be mocked and ridiculed. And I think they should be given no deference whatsoever. They're foolish and selfish.
Years later, as the Tea Party rose up, Jenny Thomas, the pep rally warrior woman, cheered them on.
They think they can intimidate you. They think they can demoralize you.
Jenny Thomas seems to absolutely adore the Tea Party movement.
Are you going to be intimidated? Me either. Are you going to be demoralized? Me either.
These are people who are ordinary people rising up in anger against the government. It's very much kind of an echo of the same strain in American politics that she grew up in the John Birch Society. And these become her people.
And they say a storm was coming. They ain't seen nothing yet, right?
As republicanism itself has changed and gotten more nationalistic and more populist and more aggressive, and in my view, less defensible, she's sort of blown with those winds as well.
While her husband was very limited in what he could do or say politically, she saw herself as having more running room, more freedom to get out there and play a hands-on role in rallying and organizing conservatives. She saw herself as on the same mission as her husband, but in a much more partisan, political, hands-on, practical kind of way.
She came to Washington hoping to run for Congress, and she found another path to power. She's fully committed to politics. She's fully committed to her beliefs and her agenda. She's going to make a difference in the world. She just had to find a different way.
We're up against a very big battle. There may be some dark days ahead. I know there's dark days ahead.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
Clarence and Ginny Thomas's power reached a new level when Donald Trump was elected president.
Our radical Democrat opponents are driven by hatred, prejudice, and rage. They want to destroy you, and they want to destroy our country as we know it.
Donald Trump is a divider who, very much like Ginny Thomas, sort of sees America's political divisions as fights, wars, good versus evil.
The radical left are trying to rip our nation apart.
We're up against a fascist left, and so this is a battle. They're coming for my husband. They're coming for President Trump.
What's interesting is she became a voice for pushing Trump even further to the right.
May we all have guns and concealed carry to handle what's coming. By the way,
Justice Clarence Thomas of the Supreme Court of the United States and Mrs. Virginia Thomas.
In the Trump White House, the Thomases were honored guests. And now, after the death of Justice Scalia, it was Clarence Thomas who was feted as a hero of MAGA Republicans.
With Scalia's passing, the attention just started focusing on Thomas. People are paying more attention, particularly on the right, to what Thomas is saying, and seeing that, as those of us who know him always knew, he's his own man.
Trump moved to secure Thomas's hold on the court, appointing 3 new conservative justices.
I will nominate Judge Neil Gorsuch, Judge Brett Kavanaugh, Judge Amy Coney Barrett.
This gave Clarence Thomas, for the first time in all the time he'd been on the court, a group of justices who would side with him, and it gave him power. He became kind of the leader in many ways of the conservative wing of the court, and the conservative wing of the court ruled. They would have normally called it the Roberts Court, but everybody began to see it as the Thomas Court.
Ginny Thomas was expanding her own influence, too. She had direct access to the White House to lobby the administration.
It's no secret that Ginny Thomas wields power because of who her husband is. She gets doors opened for her. She gets invited into the important rooms, into the important discussions, because her husband is Clarence Thomas.
Here's Ginny being Phyllis Schlafly, but at the center of things of power in Washington. Phyllis Schlafly never had the person-to-person political on-the-ground influence, I think, and centrality that Ginny Thomas has carved out for herself.
And right-winger, white supremacist.
But then, the 2020 election.
Behind the scenes.
The Fox News decision desk can now project that former Vice President Joe Biden will win Pennsylvania and Nevada.
He is President-elect Joseph Robinette Biden.
Become the 46th President of the United States.
Ginny is absolutely shattered. She's upset in a way that is very sincere and genuine. She truly believes that Joe Biden is a force of immense evil who is going to destroy America. Remember, Joe Biden presided over Clarence Thomas's confirmation hearings. So Ginny views Biden not just as any regular presidential candidate, but as almost a personal enemy.
We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
As MAGA protesters were taking to the streets, Ginny Thomas was working from the inside. She texted messages to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows.
Do not concede. It takes time for the army who is gathering for his back. You guys fold, the evil just moves fast down underneath you all.
In those text messages, it's not just texting Mark Meadows, it's saying that she could send emails to Jared Kushner. It's that she was working directly with congressional staffs. All of that is revealed.
Denver Riggleman was a former Republican congressman and investigator for the January 6th committee. He helped uncover the text messages.
You know, by the first text message, I knew that we had an issue, right? She's referring to a bizarre conspiracy theorist who talked about this incredible operation where the Biden crime family should go to Gitmo. And I had to read it about 10 times.
Biden crime family and ballot fraud co-conspirators are being arrested and detained for ballot fraud right now and over coming days, and will be living in barges off Gitmo to face military tribunals for sedition.
Ginny had something of a break with reality. Because even though we've seen her say a lot of stuff that's out there, we had not until this point seen her promote conspiracy theories on the level of QAnon with such vigor and certitude.
Make a plan. Release the Kraken and save us from the left taking America down.
Riggleman is convinced Justice Thomas had to know what his wife was doing, even though the couple has said they keep their work lives separate.
When you have the wife of a Supreme Court justice who they both have called each other their best friends and said that they do everything together, it would defy common sense to think that they weren't discussing this.
This is spiritual warfare, as you must feel, Mark. It is about America continuing and this lonely leader and man. We are living through what feels like the end of America. Amazing times. The end of liberty.
She has this very dark Manichaean view. You're either good or you're evil, and everything is a battle between good and evil. And no wonder then she advocates extreme steps in her text to Mark Meadows, because for her, the battle between Biden and Trump, just like the battle between Republicans and Democrats, anything is good versus evil.
Pretend like she's
We're
a
good.
Christian. If
They're
she's a
evil.
true Christian, she would help the people that need help.
On the morning of January 6th, as Trump supporters gathered, Ginny Thomas was there among the crowd, posting on Facebook.
It's unprecedented and extraordinary that the wife of a Supreme Court justice, one of 9 who's on the court for life, that she was basically advocating for the overthrow of democracy in America.
God bless each of you standing up or praying.
I mean, it's a scary thought. It's a dangerous feeling situation.
Not long after Ginny Thomas says she left, Trump supporters breached the Capitol in an attempt to overturn the election.
Oh yay, oh yay, oh yay. The Supreme Court of the United States is now sitting.
Clarence Thomas's prominence on the Supreme Court continues to grow.
Just as Trump is leaving office, Thomas is coming into his own and commanding a true majority on the court.
And once again, the stakes are enormously high. Clarence Thomas and his fellow conservatives are set to dominate on issues like affirmative action, voting rights, religion, free speech.
The Thomas Court is not just extremely conservative, but extremely uninterested in concepts of judicial restraint and respect for precedent. The Thomas Court is in a hurry to shift the law rapidly to the right.
The conservative majority by a 6-3 vote, overturning Roe v. Wade, the right to choose abortion.
The Thomas Court has overturned nearly 50 years of precedent on abortion.
Now, I will say there's some parts of the Republican agenda that's okay, but then the white supremacist part, that's wrong. I am against abortion. I am against teaching homosexual sex to children in school. I am against that. But I am for affirmative action, and I am for voting rights. I am for civil rights. And I am for helping the poor. And the white ringers is not for that. The Republicans is not for that. So they need to both come together. The Democrats and the Republicans need to come together, and they need to choose what's right. If not, God is going to choose what's right. That's why corruption is being exposed right now. You see the corruption being exposed about so-called Justice Clarence Thomas taking money and get so-called money gifts. And that's probably why he voted certain ways. And because he took that money, he should be made to sit down. Excuse me for stuttering. I'm trying to get it out so fast. But because he took that money, he should be made to come down, or however you say it, to give up his seat. He should be made to give up his seat off the Supreme Court. And every vote that he made should be voted again. When he voted against the 1965 Voting Rights Act, that should be voted again, because he took money bribes to vote a certain way. Just like when dirty cops get exposed, everybody that went to jail because of that dirty cop gets a new trial. That's exactly what should happen in the Supreme Court. Everything that he voted on that was not right, that went a certain way, needs to be voted on again. Especially the affirmative action vote that he put in there, and the Civil Rights Act. Yes, affirmative action and the Civil Rights Voting Act. That should be voted again or turned over back the way it was.
Abortion.
He's been very disciplined, very persistent, and over the years has really pulled the court over towards the right and has become, extremely influential in American legal circles. I must say, I don't think that people would have thought that he would be able to pull that off. And he has.
It's a court with an energized conservative majority that's already demonstrated it is ready and willing to overturn decades of precedent and settled law.
Now the court is facing a decision on an issue that has hovered around Clarence Thomas his entire life.
Challenging the use of race in college admissions, which could have an impact on affirmative action.
If you look at where the Supreme Court is right now, in many ways, it's implementing the political agenda and imposing the views of people like Clarence Thomas and Ginny Thomas.
Just because he sold out with that white woman,
some people might call it
don't mean that
payback, others might call it the fulfillment of his
dreams. Like he wanted some white pussy, that don't mean
Clarence
that
and Ginny
affirmative action
Thomas had
and
arrived at the
racism is
pinnacle
over.
of American
Racism's
power.
still alive, and she racist. He's sleeping with the racist enemy.
Grievances, and the bitter approach to politics that had shaped them.
We already know too little about Clarence Thomas and Ginny Thomas's entanglements.
The controversy continuing to follow them.
Clarence Thomas has refused to recuse himself from Supreme Court cases related to Trump and the election.
Before he died.
It'll just roll off his back like water off of a duck's back. They're out to get me. They're going to use anything they can to get me. I got a very clear view of where I'm trying to go and what I'm trying to do, and I'm not going to look left or right.
Ginny Thomas has publicly denied any conflict of interest between her activism and her husband's work.
Their personal scandals.
In Clarence Thomas's case.
Hey, I have to keep adding parts to this. That's why it looks like it's chopped up. I have to, because it only lets me record every 30 minutes. So I have to keep adding the second part. I put part 2, part 3, part 4 all together. So it's all together in one part. If you appreciate this whole video that I did, it's all put together. So you don't have to have a part 1 and part 2 and part 3. Go ahead and hit the like button. Hit the like button to support my channel. Subscribe also. Yes, this is the last part of our presentation. This is the last part of our presentation. Justice Clarence Thomas. Justice Clarence Thomas. Justice or not. Justice Clarence Thomas. This is the last of our video for the NAAAP News with Latanya. I also have my commentary I'm about to give about some more commentary. So stay tuned. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. I know it's a big roller coaster, but the truth has to come out. Corruption has to be ended. Corruption is ended when the truth is exposed. Wait a minute. They keep stopping my video and kept giving me technical problems, but I'm getting the truth out.
Ginny Thomas's entanglements.
The controversy continuing to follow them.
Clarence Thomas has refused to recuse himself from Supreme Court cases related to Trump and the election.
They'll just roll off his back like water off of a duck's back. They're out to get me. They're going to use anything they can to get me. I've got a very clear view of where I'm trying to go and what I'm trying to do, and I'm not going to look left or right.
Ginny Thomas has publicly denied any conflict of interest between her activism and her husband's work.
Their personal scandals.
In Clarence Thomas's case, this is not the first ethics incident, even in recent years.
Now fueling doubts about the legitimacy of the court itself.
The Supreme Court trust hitting an all-time low.
The court no longer has the confidence of the American people because of its own behavior.
And that is something that hurts the institution of the Supreme Court.
What is troubling is what happens to a democracy when the people don't trust the Supreme Court anymore.
The Supreme Court is the one that voted in to make gay marriage legal across America. The citizens didn't get to vote on it. The citizens didn't get to vote on gay marriage. The Supreme Court voted on it when Obama was in there. Obama and the Supreme Court made gay marriage legal in every state. Before it was some states, now it's legal in every state. And the Supreme Court is the one that did it. The citizens, the people didn't get to vote on it. The Supreme
For more
Court
on this
voted
and
on
other
it.
Frontline programs,
And I
visit
bet
our
you some of them
website
Republicans was right behind that mess too.
pbs.org/frontline.
They was behind all that mess too, but then they want to talk against it. Thank you so much for watching. I have some more commentary left. I have more commentary, and also Clarence Thomas talking about he gonna be in there forever. No, he ain't gonna be in there forever. Nobody lives forever unless the Lord wants him to live forever. Unless we in heaven or something like that, then we're gonna live forever. But he talking about he gonna be in the Supreme Court forever. I guess he mean he gonna be in there till he die. But you know what? Somebody can make a new law, just like they always come up with new laws against civil rights and all that. Somebody can make a new law against Clarence Thomas, his mess, and they need to make him come down from off the seat. And like I said, that they need to redo everything that he voted on. They need to redo it. It's not yet clarified if there will be charges or not, or will they make him stand down or step down from his seat. I'm gonna read an article from Slate.com. With Lisa Graves. I'm gonna read some of it, not much. One of the things that struck me is that, as the ProBuca reporters note, Thomas previously disclosed gifts of tuition until it came to Harlan Crow. Harlan Crow, that's that billionaire that he's so-called friends with. He hid the gifts that came, gifts of tuition that came from Harlan Crow. He hid that. Second of all, Pauletta refers to a clause within the rules regarding gifts. That rules involve whether you declare someone to be a dependent on your taxes. So it was up to him whether he disclosed the gift or not. It's saying he's saying I don't know who Paloretta is, but Paloretta refers to a clause within the rules regarding gifts. It's a clause within the rules regarding gifts. That rules involve whether you declare someone to be a dependent on your taxes. So it's up to him whether he declares somebody dependent on his taxes or not. That's what they're saying. And whether he accept the gift or not. Also, the Slate article is saying, and we haven't seen Clarence Thomas's taxes to know whether he declared his grandnephew who was living with him, who Paloretta says he was spending a lot of money on as a dependent. But even regardless of that, this goes to the appearance of impropriety. This is a tuition that costs $75,000 a year. That's a lot of money. Most Americans cannot afford that tuition. Clarence Thomas could, in part because of that money that he receives as Supreme Court Justice and the money his wife has received from the undisclosed donors that he funded her pay from the right-wing infrastructure. And see, they act like they don't want black people and minorities to get money or welfare, whatever they want to call it, social assistance. They don't want poor people to get social assistance or minorities to get social assistance and affirmative action, but they don't mind accepting money and gifts in impropriety. That's just like accepting money and gifts too, and they getting way more money and gifts than a little welfare check or somebody's affirmative action. They getting way more money, thousands of dollars, and they getting their children's whole college tuition paid. The grandchild, the tuition $75,000 a year paid from billionaires, and guess why? So that he can vote the way that them white billionaires want him to vote, even if it's against his own African American people. And that's a shame. And like I said earlier, I don't know if it got cut off because I had technical problems earlier, but go ahead and comment and let me know. If a billionaire came to you and said, would you vote against your African American people, or would you vote against your people if we give you millions of dollars every year? Would you do it, yes or no? And be honest. Me, no, I wouldn't do it, because I know there's you get the answer to God, and I know there is a God, and you get the answer to God sooner or later. And if you go against your own kind for the evilness instead of doing what's right and what's good, there is a hell. And I sure don't want to go to hell, so I know I wouldn't do it. A bunch of money ain't worth it. You can't take that money with you when you die. That's my opinion on that. But if you got a different opinion, go ahead and give your opinion. Comment. This is a channel we for everyone to express their opinion. It's a fair use act, freedom of information. I'm gonna finish a little more with this article. Like I said, most Americans cannot afford that tuition. It said that they did not choose to disclose. It's saying in part because the money that he receives as a Supreme Court justice and the money his wife has received from the undisclosed donors that have funded her pay from the right-wing infrastructure, but they chose not to. They chose to have Harlan Crow pay for that child's tuition. See what I'm saying? They didn't mind no charity then, but then they don't want nobody else to get no charity. They don't want the black people to get no charity. But what's her name? His wife Jenny, she don't want the women's rights and all that, but she don't mind getting some money for her pay. And you see what I'm saying? Clarence Thomas don't want no affirmative action or no help for nobody else, but he don't mind getting millions of dollars help for him that he don't even need. He gets paid. He gets money. He don't need that Harlem Crow money, but he wanted to make sure his grandchildren and whoever else that he wanted to help gets the money they needed, and the $1 million he probably put in his money savings account. Ain't no telling what else all that money that billionaire gave him. That Harlan Crow is a billionaire. He probably got way more than what they saying he got from that Harlan Crow. And ain't no telling what kind of nude trips and whatever they was doing on all those vacations. But the truth will come out. That's why I pray for the corruption to be exposed. And I want every NAAAP member and every subscriber that's watching to pray for corruption to be exposed. Pray that corruption will come to an end. Any corruption of any kind, pray that corruption and evilness will come to an end. Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord. This article that Slate.com is also saying, let me see. We again learned this week that Leonard Leo is part of this pipeline between the Federalist Society and big donors in their efforts to reshape the courts. Leo got a $1.6 billion donation from a manufacturing tycoon. Once again, the news of what Leo involves himself in and whatever else he is overseeing proves the Federalist Society is not just a debate society, as he and others have long claimed. See, I told you about that them college, what I say, those college groups or whatever, talking about sororities. They more than just sororities. It's part of some kind of government thing. That's why it's a billion dollar issue about colleges and college games and stuff like that and college sororities. I didn't know it was like that. If I knew it was like that, I wouldn't have persuaded my daughter to go to college. I persuaded her to go to college so that she could take care of herself as an adult. But them colleges kind of brainwash people, and especially if you're not strong mentally, it'll brainwash you. And they do that purposely. They even doing it on the black colleges to try to brainwash them against what they know better. They trying to brainwash them against their own kind so that they can train a bunch of sellouts. But you got to teach your child, if you go to college, do not go there just to be trained to be a sellout. You still stay strong and loyal to your people and your family. That's what you have to teach your children nowadays, just so before they go to college, because some of these colleges is trying to teach them against everything that the parents want them to do. And same thing for some of these elementary schools. They teaching them against what the parents don't want them to do. That's why you got to get involved and find out what in the world's going on in these schools and what's going on in the law, in the court system and everything. You got to find out what's going on in the politics and who to vote for. Thank the Lord we did get Biden in there, even though Biden's using all the money for Ukraine so they can start some kind of another white supremacy land over there in Ukraine, allegedly. He's spending all the money over there. Now they fighting now about if they got enough money for Social Security and other low income social programs. They got the money for it because they sending 300 million billions of dollars every month over there to Ukraine for weapons just to fight and bomb people. And for, like I said, it's some kind of white supremacy nation over there, another white supremacist nation. We don't need no more white supremacist nations. Got enough of them. And let me see what else they're saying. It's saying that we again learned this week that Leonard Leo is part of the pipeline between the Federalist Society. See, I told you, sorority society, and big donors in their efforts to reshape the course. Leo got a $1.6 billion donation from a manufacturing tycoon. 1.6 billion. Once again, the news of what Leo involves himself in and that whatever else he is overseeing proves the Federal Society is not just a debate society. See, the debate society like they claim in college. And he and others have long claimed. See, it's more than that. It's political. There's been a series of major breakthrough investigations through the original Washington Post investigation in May of 2019 that first really unmasked the initial scope of money that had been raised with Leonard Leo at the center of it to help capture the U.S. Supreme Court and other courts and reshape law and roll back our rights. That's awful. Like and subscribe to support this channel, please. Like and subscribe. Let me see if something else is important that I need to report on this NAAAP news. One moment. It's saying the story of the Feather Society is one of the optics in reality. At the law school level, they do host debates. That is true. But the real operational function of the Federalist Society within the right-wing network is the operational imperative that their leaders describe in a 1987 story by the New York Times, in which they basically said that the group had founded just a few years earlier. But within a decade, they anticipated their people being in key positions in all branches of government. Ooh. That was their objective. Remember, I said it was a plan. It was probably a plan for Jenny to come to Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas probably didn't even know that woman was gonna come to him and that they sent her to him. They sent her to him to make sure that he voted the way that they wanted them to vote. And she stayed with him all them years to make sure that he kept selling out. She was the handler for him. I'm gonna read this part again. That's awful. Let me see. They reported this way back in 1987. They knew what they was doing. In 1987, that's when they went on ahead and declared him on the Supreme Court system, on the Supreme Court seat. To be a Supreme Court judge in 1987. They knew way back then. See, they said the Federalist Society was a right-wing network. They said in 1987, the story by the New York Times, in which they basically said that the group had been founded just a few years earlier, but that within a decade, they anticipated their people being in key positions in all branches of government. That was their objective. See, that was their plan. And Leonard Leo, has been the key operator in that objective of identifying, let me see, of identifying people to help push into positions of power, including the Supreme Court and state attorneys general. See, Leonard Leo, he identified the people. I told you it was a plan. It was a plan. And what's the name? Clarence Thomas, he was in college with all those people that was in Washington, D.C., ready to go. They was ready and lined up to go right into the politics. We know that the Republican Attorneys General Association has had a lot of donors over the years. One of the donors that has given more than $2 million since 2014 is Koch Industries. But you know who gave more? The Judicial Crisis Network. The Judicial Crisis Network and its successor entity, the Concord Fund, and that's Leonard Leo's operation. Let me see. I'm gonna go up again and see who this Leonard Leo is. I didn't want to read all of this to save some time. Let me see. I'm gonna just see who Leonard Leo is if they mention it. It's saying Clarence Thomas, Harlan Crow, and Leonard Leo's defenders cannot be serious. Pretending the question here is whether the conservative activists had business before the court is absurd. They pretending that it's absurd to find out if they had business before the court. No, it's not absurd. It's absurd that they did that and ripping people off. They ripping people's rights off so that they can be rich and go on their vacations and do their little freaky vacations like they want to do. Allegedly. So Leonard Leo, like I said, Harlan Crow and Leonard Leo's defenders. So he's all along with him. Leonard Leo, he must be one of them rich people too. He's right along with Harlan Crow, and that's Clarence Thomas's friend. See, the story by Dahlia Lithwick on Slate.com. And this is a shame. Last week, several new revelations surfaced about Justice Clarence Thomas and the gifts, benefits, and consulting fees he has garnered from right-wing judicial activist Harlan Crow and the architect of right-wing judicial activism, Leonard Leo. Okay, so that's who Leonard Leo is, a right-wing judicial activism. Just like I thought. See what I mean? And they said Leonard Leo, they set up to reshape the court system all the way back in 1987. It was a plan. If you need to, rewind this video again to hear what I said. Watch it as many times as you need to get all the information. Every time you watch it, you'll get even more information. Thank you again for watching. It was very informative. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Subscribe so you don't miss out on any more of Star Diamond's videos and any more of NAAAP news.